believe that it's real. The way that you made me feel.
I am here today in Manhattan with Brenda Lewis, whose job description is fascinating. Brenda, tell us what you're up to.
Hi, very nice to talk to you. I am a psychotherapist, and I deal with intimacy issues surrounding sexuality, people from all different walks of life and all different ages. And it's a particular passion of mine because I think sexuality is a part of everybody's life, from adolescence to old age.
So what are the kinds of issues that you're looking at with the demographic of over 50?
Over 50 is a very interesting age because in my experience it's an opportunity to begin again. For many people it's they either have adolescents or college age children or students that are graduating, and it's an opportunity for couples to either rediscover intimacy and develop a new kind of sexuality, or if they're on their own, divorced, they've had losses, it's an opportunity to go back into the dating field, integrating appropriate, relevant sexuality that can be extremely vibrant from 50 and over.
Well, certainly with this demographic, we are looking at issues on both sides, for both genders, whether it's erectile dysfunction or it's loss of libido on the part of many women. I presume these are factors in a lot of what you're talking about. Can you just talk to us a little bit about how we can get around these issues, or how a modern marriage or a modern couple or even a dating couple starts to deal with these things?
Absolutely. I think it's very, very important with a couple that has been together for a long time. Sexuality will change. Emotional body image issues will emerge in terms of, they'll get played out in terms of the sex life. I think that you need to determine, is there a genuine sexual dysfunction? Has there always been a real sexual dysfunction? Or is it relevant? Is it because someone's anxious or under pressure from the world? Is reality impeding the flow of, so to speak, and the erection? And also people need to be more tolerant with each other. They're not machines. As I like to say in the book I'm writing about these kinds of issues, sex is not an Olympic sport, at least not yet. And for women, it's not just women that can experience loss of libido, but often that could be insecurity. They feel they don't have it anymore. They don't have the same bodies they used to have. They're fearful that they're not desirable enough. And if these kinds of issues are addressed, the sex life can be definitely enhanced, and it can feel like a wonderful new beginning when people start over. We'll talk about exercises and sensuality and taking showers together and just developing a playfulness and a kindness and a tolerance, so it's not just about the performance.
Right, so expectations come into it a lot, what people's expectations are, and I guess men have their own set of expectations about what proper performance is, and women have their set of issues about their bodies and perhaps the length of time it takes them to achieve satisfaction. So I can imagine over time in a relationship that these issues get compounded if people aren't talking about them. So
absolutely. I think that people start feeling very isolated, and your point about men having difficulty in or sustaining erections, or maybe not being able to ejaculate, and women not getting as lubricated, are definitely issues to address. And often people who talk about them, who communicate for the first time possibly about them, and look at it in context. It's not the only thing. It belongs in a context. Find a way to get around these kinds of work with what they've got, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I like to, and the sex can become varied. And it could be that all along people have just developed really bad habits. And in talking about it, they can switch things up, they can try things differently, and it creates a certain excitement. Also the roles. People have been playing roles. This is a time to free yourself from roles. And when people feel liberated, and freer to be who they are, it also develops a newness and a freshness and an opportunity to have a new beginning together, and a safer beginning and a more fun, never mind the quality of the sex.
Okay. Well, I'm curious because you mentioned playfulness and curiosity. Do you work with, kind of role playing and fantasy, and has that ever worked out as a process to get people to use that more
It's
often?
such an interesting question. I think that when people know each other so well, I think that each person has an unconscious fantasy life. Many people have no clue as to their partner's unconscious fantasy life. However, if there are real sexual dysfunctions, I'll often advise people to stay away from those fantasies and deal with reality as a way of dealing with a dysfunction and learning to really just be together. However, when people are two consenting adults in their 50s, they feel they're rediscovering themselves and they're rediscovering each other. I would say that absolutely it can be encouraged to communicate about things that feel safe, that don't feel like a violation or a threat. And so there's definitely room for that at the right time.
Do you find that it's sometimes difficult to get clients to really open up? Or do you find that perhaps in a couple one is more open and forthcoming and the other remains more closed? Or
I find that maybe just because I understand and have empathy for both sexes, both genders, that both people are so ready to talk about their hurt. Many men, there's gender, each one has a myth. Men don't want the intimacy, but many men are actually very available from 50 and up to develop a closeness and to deepen and to, transcend where they've been before. In fact, there's a great desire to do that, to feel alive, and rather than going off and having a midlife crisis, they can imbue what they have in a way that's very exciting to them and to their partner. One of the dangers is when people stop communicating, or they withdraw, or they feel isolated, or they feel not desirable mutually, and then the sex life falls off. And really what we talk about is rediscovering it and finding very concrete ways to assure togetherness of whatever kind. If you're starting over and there's been no intimacy, a sensual massage may be the way, without expectations. If there's a desire, the couple know each other well, they want to open up more about fantasies, and as long as their unconscious fantasies mesh and don't sort of hurt each other, then emotionally, then that can work very well. So a lot of the time you're dealing with the reality of how people are really feeling, and the whole idea of it is to enhance the closeness of the couple, of a couple that's still defining and redefining themselves and their sex life, and that really should not end. I guess I could talk a little bit about the reality. Some people talk to me about the use of Viagra and when it's necessary and if it's necessary, and instead of being anxious and having a sex life with your own expectation instead of it going towards your partner, there's definitely a use for these kinds of medications that exist, and sharing the whole process in a sense of taking it, rather than being secretive and shameful as if you have a performance and to accomplish. And with women, men feel inadequate, and women feel insecure because they're not as lubricated, or they feel their bodies aren't what their bodies used to be. But I think if people find good communication, and there's candles, and they can create romance, or they can have all kinds of different sex played out in the ways they used to and in new ways, then there's definitely a use for all these kinds of aids. But it's really in the spirit of sharing, because really masturbation is alone, but sex is together. Mm-hmm. And so when people have sex and they act like they're alone, then there's a big disconnect in terms of intimacy, and the other person feels abandoned or left out, or feels that they are not welcomed, so to speak. And everybody wants to feel, like I said, cohesive and together when they're engaging in sexuality and having fun together. That's really what it's about.
So it seems, I think that you said before that you have seen positive results in other areas of people's lives when they do re-engage with their own sensuality and sexuality. And I guess that's something you've seen, right?
I think that is very well, that is so true. I think that I like to talk about two circles that intersect, and in the middle of that intersection is, the things that people share, maybe family, friendships, and sex. And I think that if people have an anchor, and in the old days they might have called it the glue, then that anchor somehow translates and radiates into the person's individual world, and vice versa. The happier you are individually, the more energy you want to give towards your sex life. So mindfulness and taking care of oneself in one's own space is very important, but also that connection with primary connection is vital and very important to maintaining that glue and that anchor.
I think that, the question of women and loss of libido has always been kind of interesting to me, because it seemed to be my experience in life that the more sex you had, the more you wanted, the more you enjoyed it. I don't know if this is something that people are finding, but
I think that's very, it's interesting that you had that experience, and I think you'll read books or hear about shows where people are making an effort to have sex every day. I would say it's the same for sex as it is for working out. The more you do it, the better you can feel.
Right,
the more yoga classes you can get to in a week, the better. So absolutely, frequency creates a connection, creates an ease. You don't bury it somehow in a drawer and think about it, and then create anxiety about it. It becomes more possible. It starts happening in different ways. Spontaneity starts developing. People start thinking about it outside of the bedroom. And so you're absolutely right. I think that frequency is very much something to strive for and often encourage, as long as both couples want that. For some couples, once a month may feel like enough, but it's being in sync that counts. If someone wants to be intimate 5 times a week and someone wants it once a month, you're going to have a problem. So you're absolutely right, but generally speaking, starting off, you need to have that frequency.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting that for this demographic, what you're stressing is intimacy and sensuality, playfulness, and maybe just wind it up with saying a little bit more about, maybe give us all a bit of advice.
Okay. I think the advice is to keep it in perspective, to look at it as a healthy part of life, to look at it as a very, very important part of life, and a creative and a place where you can connect non-verbally. There's nothing like a hug, and there's nothing like feeling alive in a sexual way, right? There's affection, and there is also sexuality, and this is a wonderful opportunity, primal way to communicate and to connect. So I highly recommend it, that people keep people young.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Ellery. Thank you.
Great.
I'd like to mention, for instance, the movie The Sessions. Many people that I work with, people that I spoke to, felt very moved by that movie, because it was about a dying man. He did die after the loss of his, after having sex and the loss of his virginity. And I found that when I inquired as to what moved people, it was ultimately the touching, the connection, the mutuality, and the humanness of sexuality and sex that was so inspiring, in a sense, to so many people and to all of us. So I'd like to end it. Sex could be a very inspiring thing to continue to aspire to.
Indeed, and you said that a lot of men were very moved by that, and which is something for women to hear.
I think that's very important, to get over the myth that men feel this and all the stereotypes, and to actually just listen and talk and engage, and people will find out they may communicate differently, but in a human way they're not that different. Everybody wants to be loved and touched.
Great. All right.
Thanks.
Go out and touch someone, everyone.
Great.
I can't believe that